Chapter 12. Friends from the East. 3 days after her return to the ranch, Madeline could not discover any physical discomfort as a reminder of her adventurous experiences. This surprised her, but not nearly so much as the fact that after a few weeks she found she could scarcely remember the adventures at all. If it had not been for the quiet and persistent guardianship of her cowboys, she might have almost forgotten Don Carlos and the Raiders. Madeline was assured of the splendid physical fitness to which this ranch life had developed her, and that she was assimilating something of the Western disregard for danger. A hard ride, an accident, a day in the sun and dust, and an adventure with outlaws. These might only have been matters of large import, but now, for Madeline, they were in order with all the rest of her changing life. There was never a day that something interesting was not brought to her notice. Stillwell, who was ceaselessly reproaching himself for riding away the morning Madeline was captured, grew more like an anxious parent than a faithful superintendent. He was never at ease regarding her unless he was near the ranch or had left Stewart there, or else Nels and Nick Steele. Naturally, he trusted more to Stewart than anyone else.
"Miss Majesty, it's sure amazingly strange about Jean," said the old cattleman as he tramped into Madeline's office.
"What's the matter now?" she inquired.
"Well, Jean was rustling off into the mountains again."
"Again? I did not know he had gone. I gave him money for that band of guerrillas. Perhaps he went to take it to them?"
"No, he took that a day or so after he fetched you back home, and then in about a week he went out a second time, and he's packed some stuff with him. Now he sneaked off again, and Nels was down by the lower trail and saw him meet somebody that looked like Padre Marco. Well, I went down to the church, and sure enough, Padre Marco's is gone. What do you think about that, Miss Majesty?"
"Well, perhaps Stewart's getting religion," laughed Madeline. "You told me so once."
Stillwell puffed and wiped his red face. "If'n you heard him cuss Monty this morning, you'd never guess it was religion. Monty and Nels has been giving Jean a lot of trouble lately. They're both sore in the fighting mood ever since Don Carlos had you kidnapped. Sure, they're going to break soon, and then we'll have a couple old wild Texas steers riding the range. I've a heap weary to me."
"Let Stewart take his adventurous trips into the mountains. Here, Stillwell, I have some news for you that may give you reason for worry. I have letters from home, and my sister with a party of friends is coming out to visit. They are society folks, and one of them is an English lord."
"Well, Miss Majesty, I reckon we'll all be glad to see them, unless they pack you off back east."
"Well, that isn't likely," replied Madeline thoughtfully. "I must go back sometime, though. Well, let me read you a few extracts from my mail." Madeline took up her sister's letter with a strange sensation of how easily sight of a crest monogram and scent of delicate perfumed paper could recall the brilliant life she had given up. She scanned the pages of beautiful handwriting. Helen's letter was in turn gay and brilliant and lazy, just as she was herself. But Madeline detected more of curiosity in it than a real longing to see the sister and brother in the far west. Much of what Helen wrote was enthusiastic anticipation of the fun she expected to have with the bashful cowboys. Helen seldom wrote letters, and she never read anything, not even popular novels of the day. She was absolutely ignorant of the West as the Englishman, who, she said, expected to hunt buffalo and fight Indians. Moreover, there was a satirical note in the letter that Madeline did not like, which roused her spirit. Manifestly, Helen had revealed in the prospect of new sensation. When she finished reading aloud a few paragraphs, the old cattleman snorted and his face grew redder.
Did your sister write that?"
he asked.
"Yes." "Well, I'm begging your pardon, Miss Majesty, but it doesn't seem like you. Does she know we're a lot of wild men from Brando?"
"Evidently she does. I rather think she's in for quite a surprise. Now, Stillwell, you are clever and you can see the situation. I want my guests to enjoy their stay here, but I do not want that to be at the expense of the feelings of us all, or even anyone. Helen will bring a lively crowd, and they'll crave excitement the unusual. Let us see that they are not disappointed. You take the boys into your confidence, and tell them what to expect, and tell them how to meet it. I shall help you in that. I want the boys to be in dress parade when they're off duty. I want them to be in their most elegant behavior. I do not care what they do, what measures they take to protect themselves, what tricks they contrive, so long as they do not overstep the limits of kindness and courtesy. I want them to play their part seriously and naturally, as if they had lived no other way. My guests expect to have fun. Let us meet them with fun. Now what do you say?" Stillwell rose, his great bulk towering, his huge face beaming.
"Well, I say it's the most amazingly fine idea I ever heard it in my life."
"Indeed, I am glad you like it," went on Madeline. "Come to me now, Stillwell, as you've spoken to the boys, but now that I have suggested it, I am quite a little afraid. You know what cowboy fun is, perhaps—"
"Oh, don't you be going back on that idea," interrupted Stillwell.
He was assured and bland, but his hurry to convince Madeline betrayed him.
"You leave them boys to me. Why don't they all swear by you, and same as the Mexicans to the Virgin? They won't disgrace you, Miss Majesty. They'll be simply immense. It'll beat any show you ever seen."
"I believe it will," replied Madeline. She was still doubtful of her plan, but the enthusiasm of the old cattleman was infectious and irresistible. "Well, then, we'll consider it settled. My guests will arrive on May 9th. Meanwhile, let us get Her Majesty's ranch in shape for this invasion." On the afternoon of the 9th of May, perhaps a half hour after Madeline had received a telephone message from Link Stevens announcing the arrival of her guest in El Cajon, Florence called her out onto the porch. Stillwell was there, with his face wrinkled by his wonderful smile and his eagle eyes riveted upon the distant valley. Far away, perhaps 20 miles, a thin streak of white dust rose from the valley floor and slanted skyward. "Look," said Florence excitedly. "What is it?" asked Madeline. "Link Stevens in the automobile." "Oh, no. Why, it's only a few minutes since he telephoned saying the party has just arrived." "Well, you take a look through these glasses," said Florence. One glance through the powerful binoculars convinced Madeline that Florence was right, and another glance at Stillwell told her that he was speechless with delight. She remembered a little conversation she had had with Link Stevens a short while previous. "Stevens, I hope that car's in good shape," she had said.
"Now, Miss Hammond, she's as right as the best trained horse I ever rode," he said.
"The valley road is perfect," she had gone on, musing. "I never saw such a beautiful road even in France. No fences, no ditches, no rocks, no vehicles. Just a lonely road in the desert."
"Well, it sure is lonely,"
Stevens had answered with slowly brightening eyes.
"And safe, Miss Hammond."
"My sister used to like fast riding. If I remember correctly, all of my guests were a little affected with a speed mania. It was a common disease with the New Yorkers. I hope, Stevens, that you will not give them reason to think that we are altogether steeped in the slow, dreamy manna of lager of the Southwest." Link doubtfully eyed her, and then his brawn face changed in dark aspect and seemed to shine. "Well, beg your pardon, Miss Hammond.
That's sure tall talk for Link Stevens to savvy. You mean, as long as I drive careful and safe, I can run away from my dust, so to say, and get here in something less than a greaser's tomorrow?
Madeline had laughed her assent, and now as she watched that thin streak of dust at that distance moving with the snail pace, she reproached herself. She trusted Stevens. She had never known so skillful, daring, and iron-nerved a driver as he was. If she had been in that car herself, she would have been having no anxiety. But imagining what Stevens would do on 40 miles or more of desert road, Madeline suffered a prick of confidence.
"Oh, Stillwell," she exclaimed, "I'm afraid I'll go back on my wonderful idea. What made me do it?" "Well, your sister wanted a real thing, didn't she? Said they all wanted it. Well, I reckon they're beginning to get it,"
replied Stillwell. That statement from the cattleman allayed Madeline's pangs of consciousness. She understood what she felt, though she could not put it into words. She was hungry for a sight of some well-remembered faces. She longed to hear the soft laughter and gay reprieve of old friends. She was eager for gossipy first-hand news of the old world. Nevertheless, something in her sister's letter, in messages from the others who were coming, had touched Madeline's pride. In one sense, the expected guests were hostile, insomuch as they were scornful and curious about the West that had claimed her. She imagined what they would expect in a Western ranch. They would surely get the real thing too, as Stillwell said, and in that certainty with satisfaction for a small grain of something within Madeline was approaching resentment. She wistfully wondered, however, if her sister and friends would come to see the West even a little as she saw it. That, perhaps, was hoping for too much. She resolved once and for all to do her best to give them the sensation their senses crave, and equally to show them the sweetness and beauty and wholesomeness and strength of life in the Southwest.
"Well, as Nell says, I wouldn't be in that there automobile right now for $1,000,000, remarked Stillwell.
Why is Stevens driving so fast?"
"Good Lord, fast, Miss Majesty. That hadn't been anything else except a streak of lightning so fast in this country. I'll bet Link for once is in heaven. I can just see him now, the grim, crock-eyed little devil, hunched down over that wheel as if it was a horse's neck."
"I told him not to let the ride be hot or dusty," remarked Madeline.
"Ha, ha!" roared Stillwell. "Well, I'll be going. I reckon I'd like to hear when Link drives up, but I want to be with the boys down there by the bunks. It'll be some fun to see Nels and Monty when Link comes a-flying in."
"I wish Al had stayed to meet them," replied Madeline. Her brother had rather hurried a shipment of cattle to California, and it was Madeline's supposition that he had welcomed the opportunity to absent himself from the ranch. "I'm sorry he wouldn't stay," replied Florence, "but Al's all business now, and he's doing fine. It's just as well, perhaps." "Surely that was my pride speaking. I'd like to have all my family and all my old friends to see what a man Al has become. Well, Link Stevens is running like the wind. The car will be here before we know it. Florence, we've only a few moments to dress, but first I want to order many and various and exceedingly cold refreshments for that approaching party." Less than a half an hour later, Madeline went again to the porch and found Florence there. "Oh, you look just lovely!" exclaimed Florence, as she gazed wide-eyed at Madeline. "And somehow so different." Madeline smiled a little sadly. Perhaps when she had put on that exquisite white gown something had come of her of the manner which befitted the wearing of it. She could not resist the desire to look fair once more in the eyes of those friends. The sad smile had been for the days that were gone, for she knew that what society had once been pleasing to call her beauty had trembled since it had last been seen in the drawing-room. Madeline wore no jewels, but at her waist she had pinned 2 great crimson roses. Against the dead white, they had the life and fire and redness of the desert.
Link's hit the old roundup trail. Oh, isn't he always driving that car? Said Florence.
With Florence, as with most of the cowboys, the car had never been driven, but ridden. A white spot with a long trail of dust showed low in the valley. It was now heading almost straight for the ranch. Madeline watched it growing larger moment by moment, and her pleasurable emotion grew accordingly. Then the rapid beat of horses' hoofs caused her to turn. Stuart was riding in on his black horse. He had been absent on an important mission, but his duty had taken him to the international boundary line. His presence home long before he was expected was particularly gratifying to Madeline, for it meant that his mission had been brought to a successful issue. Once more, for the 100th time, the man's reliability struck Madeline. He was a doer of things. The black horse halted wearily, without the usual pound of hoofs on the gravel, and the dusty rider dismounted warily. Both horse and rider showed the heat and dust and wind of many mile. Madeline advanced to the porch steps, and Stuart, after taking a parcel of papers from a saddlebag, turned towards her.
Stuart, you are the best of couriers. I am pleased.
Dust streamed from his sombrero as he doffed it. His dark face seemed to rise as he straightened weary shoulders. "Here's the reports, Miss Hammond," he replied. As he looked up to see her standing there, dressed to receive her eastern guests, he checked his advance with a violent action which recalled Madeline to the one he had made on the night she had met him, when she disclosed her identity. It was not fear, nor embarrassment, nor awkwardness, and it was only momentary. Yet, slight as had been his pause, Madeline received from it an impression of some strong, halting force. A man struck by a bullet might have had an instant jerk of muscular control such as convulsed Stuart. And in that instant, as her keen gaze searched his dust-caked face, she met the full, free look of his eyes. Her own did not fall, though she felt a warmth steal to her cheeks. Madeline very seldomly blushed, and now, conscious of her sudden color, a genuine blush flamed to her face. It was irritating because it was incomprehensible. She received the papers from Stuart and thanked him. He bowed, and then led the black down the path towards the corrals.
"When Stuart looks like he's been riding," Florence said, "but when his horse looks like that, he's sure been burning the wind."
Madeline watched the weary horse and rider limp down the path. What had made her thoughtful? Mostly it was something new or sudden or inexplicable that stirred her mind to quick analysis. And in this instant, the thing that had struck Madeline was Stuart's glance. He had looked at her, and the old burning fire, the darkness had left his eyes. Suddenly they had been beautiful. The look had not been one of surprise or admiration, nor had it been one of love. She was familiar, too familiar with all three. It had not been a gaze of passion, for there was nothing beautiful in that. Madeline pondered, and presently she realized that Stuart's eyes had expressed a strange joy of pride. That expression Madeline had never before encountered in the look of any man. Probably its strangeness had made her notice it and accounted for her blushing. The longer she lived among these outdoor men, the more they surprised her. Particularly, how incomprehensible was this cowboy Stuart. Why should he have pride or joy at the sight of her? Florence's exclamation made Madeline once more attend to the approaching automobile. It was on the slope now, some miles down the gradual slate. The two yellow, funnel-shaped clouds of dust seemed to shoot out from behind the car and roll aloof to join the columns that stretched behind the valley. "I wonder what riding a mile a minute would be like," said Florence. "I'd sure make Link take me. Oh, but look at them come." The giant car resembled a white demon, and but for the dust would have been appearing to be sailing in the air. Its motion was steadily forward, holding to the road as if on rails, and its velocity was astounding. Long gray veils streaming in the wind. A low rushing sound became perceivable, and it grew louder, and became like a roar. The car shot like an arrow past the alfalfa field by the bunkhouses, where the cowboys waved and cheered. The horses and donkeys in the corrals began to snort and tramp and race in fright. At the base of the long slope of the foothill, Link cut the speed more than half. Yet the car roared up, rolling the dust and flying capes and veils and ulsters, and crashed and crankled to a halt in the yard before the porch. Madeline descried a gray, disheveled mass of humanity packed inside the car. Beside the driver there were 7 occupants, and for the moment they appeared to be coming to life, moving, exclaiming under the veils and wraps and dust shields. Link Stevens stepped out and removed helmet and goggles, coolly looking at his watch. "An hour and a quarter, Miss Hammond," he said. "It's 63 miles by the valley road, and you know there's a couple bad hills. I reckon we made fair time, considerin' you wanted me to drive slow and safe." From the mass of dusty-veiled humanity in the car came low exclamations and plaintive female wails. Madeline stepped to the front of the porch, and then the deep voices of men and softer voices of women united in one glad outburst, as much as a thanksgiving as a greeting. "Majesty!" Helen Hamlin was 3 years younger than Madeline, and a slender, pretty girl. She did not resemble her sister, except in whiteness and fairness of skin, being more of brown-eyed and brown-haired type. Having recovered her breath soon after Madeline took her to her room, she began to talk. "Majesty, old girl, I'm here. But you can bet I'd never gotten here if I had known about that ride from the railroad. You never wrote that you had a car. I thought this was out west, and stagecoaches and all that sort of thing. Such a tremendous car in the road. Oh, that terrible little man with the leather trousers. What kind of chauffeur is he?" "He's a cowboy. He was crippled by falling under his horse, so I had him instructed to run the car. He can drive, don't you think?" "Drive? Good gracious, he scared us to death, except Castleton. Nothing could scare that cold-blooded little Englishman. I am crazy yet. Do you know, Majesty, I was delighted when I first saw the car, and then your cowboy driver met us at the platform. What a queer-looking individual. He had a big pistol strapped to those leather trousers. That made me nervous. When he piled us all in with our grips, he put me in the seat beside him whether I liked it or not. I was fool enough to tell him I loved to travel fast. What do you think he said? Well, he eyed up in rather coolly speculative way and said with a smile, 'Miss, I reckon anything you love and want bad will be coming to you out here.' I didn't know whether it was a delightful or candor or impotence. And then he said to us all, 'Sure, you better wrap yourselves up in veils and dusters. It's a long, slow, hot, dusty ride in the ranch, and Miss Hammond's orders was to drive safe.' He got our baggage checks and gave them to a man with a huge wagon and a 4-horse team, and then he cranked the car and jumped in,
wrapped his arms round the wheel and sank down low in that seat. There was a crack and a jerk and a kind of a flash around us, and that dirty little town was somewhere on the map behind. For about 5 minutes I had a lovely time, and then the wind began to tear me to pieces. I couldn't hear anything but the rush of the wind and the roar of the car. I could only see straight ahead. What a road! I never saw a road in my life till today. Miles upon miles and miles, with not even a post or a tree. That big car seemed to leap at the miles. It hummed and it sang. I was fascinated and then terrified. We went so fast I couldn't catch my breath. The wind went right through me, and I expected to be disrobed by any minute. I was afraid I couldn't hold any clothes on. Presently, all I could see was the flashing gray wall with a white line in the middle. Then my eyes blurred and my face burned. My ears got full of hundreds of thousands of howling devils. I was about ready to die when that car stopped. I looked, and when I could see, there you stood.
Helen, I thought you were fond of speeding, said Madeline with a laugh.
I was, but I assure you I never was before in a fast car. And I never saw a road, and I never met a driver.
Well, perhaps I have a few more surprises for you here out in the wild woolly West. Helen's dark eyes showed a sisterly memory of possibilities.
Well, you started well. I'm simply stunned. I expected to find you old and dotty. Majesty, you're the handsomest thing I've ever laid eyes on. You're so splendid and strong, and your skin is like white gold. What happened to you? What's changed? This beautiful room, these glorious roses out there, the cool, dark sweetness of this wonderful house. I know you, Majesty, and though you never wrote it, I believe you've made a home out here. That's the most stunning surprise of all. Come on now, confess. I know I've always been a selfish and not much of a sister, but if you're happy out here, I'm glad. You weren't happy at home. Tell me about yourself and about Alfred. Then I can give you all the messages and news from the East.
It afforded Madeline exceeding pleasure to have from one and all of her guests varied eclams of her beautiful home, and a real warm interest in what promised to be a delightful and memorable visit. Of them all, Castleton was the only one who failed to show surprise. He greeted her precisely as had he when he had last seen her in London. Madeline, rather to her astonishment, found meeting him again pleasurable. She discovered that she liked this Englishman. Manifestly, her capacity for liking anyone had immeasurably been enlarged. Quite unexpectedly, her old girlish love for her younger sister sprang into life, and with it, interest in those half-forgotten friends, and a warm regard of Edith Wayne, a chum from college days. Helen's party was smaller than Madeline had expected it to be. Helen had been careful to select a company of good friends, all of whom had been well known to Madeline. Edith Wayne was a brunette, a serious, soft-spoken woman, sweet and kindly, despite a rather bitter experience that had left her worldly wise. Miss Corlton Beck, a plain, lively person, had chaperoned the party. The fourth and last of the female companions was Miss Dorothy Combs, Dotty as they called her, a young woman of attractive blonde prettiness. For a man, Castleton was of very small stature. He had a pink and white complexion. A small golden mustache and his heavy eyelids always drooping made him look dollish. His attire, cut to what appeared to be exaggerated English style, attracted attention to his small size. He was immaculate. Robert Weed was a rather large, florid young man, remarkable only for his good nature. Counting Boyd Harvey, a handsome, pale-faced fellow with the carelessness smile of a man whose life had been easy and pleasant, the party was complete. Dinner was a happy hour, especially for the Mexican women who served it, and could not fail to note its success. The mingling of low voices and laughter, the old gay and superficial talk, the graciousness of a class that had lived for the pleasure of things and to make time pass pleasurably for others, all took Madeline far back into the past. She did not care to return to it, but she saw that it was well she had not wholly cut herself out from her people and friends. When the party adjourned to the porch, the heat was marked and decreased, and the red sun was sinking over the red desert. An absence of spoken praise, a gradual deepening silence attested to the impression of the visitors of that noble sunset. Just as the last curve of red rim disappeared beyond the Sierra Madres, and the golden lit began to flare brighter, Helen broke the silence with an exclamation. "It's only life. Ah, there's a rider climbing the hill. See, he's up. He has a rider." Madeline knew, before she looked, the identity of the man riding on the mesa. But she did not know until that moment how the habit of watching for him at this hour had grown upon her. He rode along the rim of the mesa and out to the point where, against the golden background, horse and rider stood silhouetted in a bold relief. "What's he doing there? Who is he?" inquired the curious Helen. "That is Stuart, my right-hand man," replied Madeline. "Every day when he is at the ranch he rides up there at sunset. I think he likes the ride and the scene, but he goes to take a look at the cattle in the valley." "Is he a cowboy?" asked Helen. "Yes, indeed," replied Madeline with a little laugh. "You will think so when Stillwell gets a hold of you and begins to talk." Madeline found it necessary to explain who Stillwell was and what he thought of Stuart, and while she was about it, of her own accord, she added a few details of Stuart's fame. "El Capitan, how interesting! What does he look like?" asked Helen. "He's superb." Florence handed the field glass to Helen and bade her look. "Oh, thank you," said Helen as she complied. "There, I see him. Indeed, he is superb. What a magnificent horse! How he stands! Why, he seems carved of stone." "Can I have a look?" said Dorothy Combs eagerly. Helen gave her the glass. "You can look, Dottie, but that's all. He's mine. I saw him first," said Helen. Hereupon Madeline's feminine guests held a spirited contest over the field glass, and three of them made gay, bantering boasts not to consider Helen's self-asserted rights. Madeline laughed with the others while she watched the dark figure of Stuart and his black outline against the sky. There came over her a thought, not by any means new or strange. She wondered what was in Stuart's mind as he stood there in the solitude and faced the desert and the darkening west. Some day she meant to ask him. Presently, he turned the horse and rode down into the shadow, creeping up the mesa. "Majesty, have you planned any fun, any excitement for us?" asked Helen. She was restless and nervous, and did not seem able to sit still a moment. "You'll think so when I get through with you," replied Madeline. "What, for instance?" inquired Helen and Dottie and Miss Beck in unison. Edith Wayne smiled her interest. "Well, I'm not counting rides and climbs or golf, but there's a necessity to train you for trips over in Arizona. I want to show you the desert and the canyon. We have to go on horseback and pack our outfit. If any of you are alive after those trips and want more, we'll go up into the mountains. I should like very much to know what each of you want particularly." "I'll tell you," replied Helen promptly. "Dot will be the same out here as she was in the East. She wants to look bashfully down at her hand, a hand imprisoned in another, and by the way, and listen to a man talk poetry about her eyes. If cowboys don't make love that way, Dottie's visit will be a failure."
Now Elsie Beck wants solely to be revenged upon us for dragging her out here. She wants some dreadful thing to happen to us. I don't know what's in Edith's head, but it isn't fun. Bobby wants to be near Elsie, and no more. Boyd wants what he's always wanted, the only thing he ever wanted that he didn't get. Castleton has a horrible bloodthirsty desire to kill something.
I declare now, I want to ride out and camp, protested Castleton.
And as for myself, went on Helen, if I only can get what I wanted. Well, I know I want to be outdoors, to get in the open, feel the sun and wind, to burn some color into my white face. I want some flesh and blood and life. I'm tired out. Beyond all that, I don't know very well. I'll try to keep Dottie from attracting all the cowboys to her train.
What a diversity of thoughts, said Madeline.
Above all, Majesty, we want something to happen, concluded Helen,
with a passionate finality.
My dear sister, maybe you will have your wish fulfilled, replied Madeline soberly. Edith, Helen has made me curious about your especially yearning. Majesty, it's only that I want to be with you for a while, replied her old friend.
There was in the wistful reply, accompanied by a dark and eloquent glance of eyes, what told Madeline of Edith's understanding, of her sympathy, and perhaps a betrayal of her own inquiet soul. It saddened Madeline. How many women might there not be who had the longing to break down the bars of their cage, but had not the spirit? End of chapter 12.